Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 67, Hundreds of Holmes.
Because there have literally been hundreds of Holmes, just so many of them.
Many. And that's only counting film. There have also been many stage adaptations, not to mention the official books and I'm sure, many unofficial spin-offs of Sherlock Holmes throughout the ages.
Yeah, right. All of the near adaptations and allusions and stuff. We're probably looking more at like thousands of Holmes, but Holmes starts with an H, so hundreds it is.
We got to keep our alliteration strong.
Yes, we have traditions, and we stick to them when it suits our needs. But anyway, what are we talking about today, Jonathan?
So we're talking about different adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. But before we can do that, we have to talk about where Sherlock Holmes comes from. Because he is, as I found out this week, the Guinness World Record holder for the most portrayed human fictional character in film and television history ever. And he was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And the inspiration for the character was a professor that Conan Doyle had in school named Dr. Bell, who was very observant. And then also the very first fictional detective ever named C. Auguste Dupin, written by Edgar Allan Poe, who was a French detective. And it's actually interesting because the stories are structured pretty much exactly like a Sherlock Holmes story. It's written in the first person from the point of view of the sidekick who tags along with this amateur detective as he solves crimes that the police can't figure out. So along with some other detective stories, Doyle took all of this stuff and created his character Sherlock Holmes, which he published in several books and short stories through the magazine The Strand. And they just exploded. They became incredibly popular to the point where, as you can imagine, these were running for years. And Conan Doyle got tired of writing these stories. He wrote lots of other stuff, historical fiction, romances and stuff like that, like from the Romanticism movement. And so he tried to kill off Sherlock Holmes in the only story that Moriarty actually makes a physical appearance in. And there's very, very famous scene of them tumbling over the waterfall.
The Reichenbach Falls.
The Reichenbach Falls, yes, to be specific. But the public did not like that. There was a huge hue and cry, and so Conan Doyle was compelled to bring back Sherlock Holmes for many more stories. I think up to that point he had 2 novels and there were 2 of what are now the canon collections of short stories. And then there would be 2 more novels and 3 more collection of short stories to follow after the character came back. So that's how kind of the canon came about. And if we're talking about Sherlock Holmes, we also have to talk about Watson. And the character of Watson is interesting because the inspiration for Watson actually basically came from Conan Doyle himself. And there are a lot of characteristics of Watson that are mirrored in the author, but it's also interesting because Watson gives the audience a point of view into the life of Sherlock Holmes. We're the observer. We're the person of average intellect observing this genius, basically trying to figure out all of these puzzles. But that is the literary history. Alex, why don't you talk us a little bit about the film history before we get into the ones that we will actually be covering?
Rightio, Jonathan. And so the first English language adaptation of Sherlock Holmes in film came about in 1912 with a series of short films, the first of which I have posted on our social media if you want to find that, and we'll put a link to it in the blog post today.
At the Filmlings.
Yes, and it starred George Trevel. Ironically enough, he was a French actor who was the first to play Sherlock in the first English adaptation. There were a couple of adaptations in Germany and Hungary before this, but this is the first English one, the first British production. So it kind of feels like the right place to start. And it's the first one that I think we still have, that it still exists. As we've talked about before in the past, a lot of the old silent era movies are just gone, which is sad. But we do have a lot of the George Travell short Sherlock stories that are around. And it would continue to take off and be made pretty much consistently up until the modern day incarnations, like Robert Downey Jr. and Ian McKellen, and my personal favorite, Bumblebee Scratch and Sniff. Benedict Cumberbatch. Warning, I have a Benedict Cumberbatch name generator up right now, and there will be a lot coming at you all about barbiturate chowder pants, or Billy Bong cheddar cheese, or bento box coggle swart. So
if you're skipping around the episode and Alex starts sounding like he's talking in tongues, he's just talking about Benedict Cumberbatch.
Exactly. Yes. But he's one of these characters who just he came about at the right time. He was popular right at the turn of the century when short silent film was becoming a big thing. And the character just hasn't rested. There's never been a period where there wasn't Sherlock Holmes adaptations being made in some way, shape, or form. And before the film ones were even big, he was a very popular character to put on stage. Especially in Britain, obviously, hundreds of productions were done with him as a character in adaptations, different stories with the same character. It's such a wonderfully simple setup, and it's had a ravenous fan base from the start. Because it's a big topic to talk about how angry fanboys and fangirls are these days in terms to their favorite characters and their favorite properties. But this might be the earliest example of a fan base being so big, so popular, so important, and so ravenous that it affected what the creator did. Because the fandom literally revolted when he tried to kill him off, and he caved and brought it back. So
reminds you, this is not necessarily a new thing.
No, it's definitely not a new thing.
It may be more pervasive, but this has kind of always happened.
And they didn't even have Reddit to complain on back in 1900. Obviously, they didn't.
Right. But they had newspapers.
They had bar rooms and parlor rooms and such to the literal chat rooms of the day in which they would rage about Sherlock being killed off. And I'm sure they'd gather around and read the new stories together. So it's a nice look not only at a fascinating character, at a steady stream of adaptations, but also one of the biggest fandoms to have ever existed, starting way back in the 1890s and going all the way up nowadays to Brindadrick, Cap'n Crunch. Some of these are going to make more sense than others, and I apologize for that, but I'm doing my best here.
Who built this algorithm? That's what I want to know.
Somebody on Tumblr? I don't know. I will blast this thing out on social for other people to use at their own discretion. It is a wonderful tool for no particular purpose other than your own amusement. So
with
go
great
for
power
it.
Comes great responsibility.
Yeah. But let's get specific, Jonathan. What adaptations are we talking about among the thousands of Sherlock adaptations out there? What are we discussing today?
Well, after combing through many listicles online, I have found what might be the top 3 definitive adaptations of Sherlock Holmes that are constantly brought up as some of the best and or most popular and influential. So we're going to start off with The Hound of the Baskervilles from 1939, starring Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes and Nigel Bruce as John Watson. The film was directed by Sidney Lanfield, and it kicked off one of the waves of Holmes' popularity in which Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce would go on to create 14 follow-up films, some more or less faithful to actual Conan Doyle stories. Some were just completely fabricated.
You mean Mr. Holmes Goes to Washington is not a canon story?
No, it is not. Mr. Holmes, Africa Screams? No.
Nope. Non-canon. Definitely non-canon. And the second one we're going to talk about today comes from 1987, The Sign of Four, which is a movie made with longtime Sherlock star Jeremy Brett as, the eponymous detective, and Edward Hardwicke as Watson. Jeremy Brett would play Sherlock on TV for like 10 years. And he would do several, both TV movies and movie movies as the character. This particular movie happened to be directed by Peter Hammond. But yeah, Jeremy Brett, very influential. I don't know if he's that well known outside of some people who are diehard like Sherlock history fans, along with just Sherlock fans. But this, and we'll talk about this today, but this one had a large influence on modern day incarnations of Sherlock, including the Stephen Moffat incarnation.
Right, which is going to be the last version that we talk about today. Sorry if my audio is kind of weird. It is storming outside my window as of like 5 minutes before we started recording. Just going to put that out there.
And surprisingly enough, it's not storming in LA.
Surprisingly. So anyway, the last film that we're going to be talking about, and I say film, but Alex, we are breaking new ground on the podcast today.
It's our first TV episode.
It is our first technical TV episode, even though it is an hour and a half long, probably longer than some of the films that we've covered.
Definitely some of the earlier ones.
Right. So that's going to be the first episode of the BBC show Sherlock, and that first episode is called A Study in Pink. The series was created by Stephen Moffat. The show stars
Burberry Cuckoo Clock.
Yes, it stars Smaug and Bilbo Baggins, aka Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman as Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, respectively.
Body build cumbersome.
And since we haven't done TV before, we haven't looked at TV awards before, but we'll throw some out here. This episode has won a BAFTA for Best Editing in Fiction and Entertainment, and also a Welsh BAFTA for Best Drama Series, Best Director of Photography, and Best Production Design.
Did you know there are Welsh BAFTAs?
I did not. I assumed one of the letters in BAFTA had a nationality, so it would have to be different if it was a different country.
Right, doesn't B stand for British?
That's what I would have assumed, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, Britain's the island, right? So, Wales is on Great Britain, right? I don't know. I'm probably offending a whole lot of Welshmen right now, and I apologize for that.
We're terrible. We're terrible Americans.
What else is new? Anyway, there we go. Yeah, real quick, Bumblebee cover girl, Buckyball crumple sack, Brandy Buck countryside.
As a side note, there is a clip somewhere of Benedict Cumberbatch describing what he thinks his name sounds like, and he says that his name sounds like a fart underwater. So now that you have that image in your mind, we're breaking new ground twice on this podcast, Alex, because we are starting something new. We tend to get a little bit rambly when we talk about our movies, so we are going to have our friend Jason, former guest and future guest.
The Blue Jay.
But yes, the Blue Jay on Twitter. He's going to read us our descriptions. So welcome, Jason. How about you give us the description for The Hound of the Baskervilles from 1939?
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, I'm Jason. I'll be doing your movie summaries from here on out, and we'll be starting with The Hound of the Baskervilles from 1939. We open on a man running for his life with the sound of howling in the background. He collapses after a heart attack, but the country physician who declares Sir Charles Baskerville dead is not satisfied that heart failure is the only cause of death. So he asks Sherlock Holmes to investigate and prevent a similar death of Sir Charles' son Henry. Holmes sends Watson to accompany Henry to the estate and see what he can find out. During the stay, Watson meets the suspicious housekeepers at the estate, the kind brother and sister who are the Baskervilles' closest neighbor, and even a run-in with a dangerous vagrant on the moor. There is a lot of talk about a mysterious hound that has haunted the Baskerville family for generations. Holmes and Watson must see through ages of jealousy to solve the case. And now back to you guys.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, Jonathan. So first of all, we have to talk about our Sherlock in this incarnation of Sherlock, and that is Basil Rathbone. And some notable things he's been in. He's played the villain in The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, the Errol Flynn version from the 30s.
Classic.
Which is absolutely classic. He was in the one of the Hitchcock films. I want to say it was Notorious.
Oh, really?
Playing the evil neo-Nazi, or not even neo-Nazi, just OG Nazi.
Yeah, I was gonna say
hiding out in Brazil.
that movie deals directly with Nazis.
Yeah, no, old Nazis. And I just recently saw him in The Court Jester, in which he kind of like reprises his role in.
That's
and
that's one of my family's favorite movies.
It is wonderful. But he's just a.
But do you take the vessel with the pestle?
Oh, jeez. Yeah, but Rathbone is kind of like this really great character actor who loves to have fun and just really brings a role to life in this really kind of outlandish way. And he does that with Sherlock. You get the sense that this version of Sherlock is very, very a madcap. He's very, for the fun of it, he's enjoying what he's doing in this very intense, fun way. And the whole movie is kind of shaped around the idea that for Sherlock, this is kind of a romp. Like, you get the sense that it matters deeply to the characters who are involved in this mystery. But for Sherlock, this is about having fun, exploring this mystery and solving it and doing all of the crazy stuff he can, like disguising himself like a really old man, which is a very funny sequence in this movie. Sherlock does it well, but Rathbone does a very good turn as this guy Sherlock.
The disguises are one of the greatest things about the character of Sherlock Holmes in a visual medium, because you can read that, Sherlock Holmes did this disguise and stuff, but when you see an actual person like having that beard on and like doing the different voice, and he takes it off and you're like, oh wow, you look so different. I think that's one of the greatest things about watching these adaptations.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the funnest things for the actors who play the character to do. This is, and you get the sense that there's, it's a studio system, so obviously there's different motivations, but there's a reason that Rathbone could do 14 Sherlock movies. It's just such a fun character. Like, it's so madcap, it's so crazy, and it's weird because it's in this world that's so dark and kind of horrific in this incarnation of the Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah, it is interesting. There are some slight changes in the book. For the most part, though, it gets the gist of the book and condenses it. But yeah, Basil Rathbone has that. He has a very much confidence. This adaptation, like, he's very confident in his abilities. He has a matter of factness. Like, he just tells facts as they are.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this character is going to be able to solve what's going on.
Right. Yeah. There's a little bit less of the discovery in this one, and it's a little bit due to the nature of the story, because for a good meet in the middle, Holmes sends Watson out, and Watson is kind of trying to figure stuff out, and then Holmes reveals that he's been there the whole time, but we haven't seen him for some of that. So at that point, he already has a lot of the information, and we don't get to see him discovering the case like we get to do in some of the other stories. But speaking of Holmes, we have to talk about the Watson interpretation in Nigel Bruce, and this is my least favorite Watson. He's fun, but he's fun in this like bumbling sidekick kind of a way that just did not give me the impression that the stories do.
Right.
Whenever you read them, because Watson is not just like, he's not dead weight for Holmes, which I felt like he kind of was in this one.
Yeah. Watson's
he actually
a smart
has input,
guy.
and
he's a doctor.
Right.
I mean, yeah, for crying out loud, he's a doctor. He's not dumb by any means. He's just nowhere near on Holmes's level, and he is there to show you how smart Holmes is. Like, here's somebody you would assume
or he's what we think we like. He's probably a little bit above average intelligence, and so, if we're connecting with Watson, we're feeling good about ourselves, and then we're like also still in awe of Holmes. But that you don't get that impression with this Watson, who's like, oh wow, what is happening here?
Yeah, right.
He has this kind of Santa Clausy voice, which is fun, but it doesn't add a whole lot to the story.
Yeah, other than just pure
Comic
entertainment
relief,
value,
yeah.
which isn't bad. Like, there's nothing wrong with entertainment. It just means that you kind of suck kind of the dramatic turn of like a character arc or a complex character or an awful lot of character ripe tension out of the story.
And you also limit the relationship between Holmes and Watson, which is a very friendly one. But in this one, it's like, I don't know. It's so weird. Like, if you actually think about their characters, you're like, why is Holmes hanging out with this guy? Like he's just there to amuse Holmes or something.
Yeah, this version is very much predicated on the idea that you know about these two characters already. You don't
There's
have
no
to
establishing.
you don't have to see an origin story. You just know that they hang out together, and you don't have to really explore their friendship or their partnership. You don't have to explore why they hang out. Like they just are together, which is like the exact opposite of what we're going to end on today.
Right.
Which I find amusing because both versions are very, very entertaining and fun to watch and enjoyable. But they're and with the same character, the same background stories, but they're entertaining for kind of different reasons.
Yeah. But it's one of the advantages that you have when you tackle a character like Sherlock Holmes, who has such an established legacy that people who have never read a Sherlock Holmes story or even maybe seen a full Sherlock Holmes film or play know who Sherlock Holmes is. They know that his sidekick is Watson. They probably know that he competes with Lestrade at the police and he's got his pipe, he's got his signature things. These are just things that you can take for granted, even if you're starting a brand new incarnation of the character.
Yeah. Take your cocaine addiction and just run with it.
Except not in 1939. This definitely felt a little bit, golden agey. It had a little bit more shine to it than Conan Doyle had, because Conan Doyle's Sherlock goes to really dark places that you can't really do if you're doing a family fun kind of a version.
Yeah, this is kind of the family fun version of Hound of the Baskervilles, which is weird because Hound of the Baskervilles is one of the scariest of the Holmes stories. Like a lot of them are mystery stories,
which is why
like
it's the most popular or most well known, probably.
Yeah, but this one has a lot of built-in tension, a lot of built-in like fear, and a classic setting that is just really cool and scary. And I just really love the idea that that this story has led to so many different production design departments having to design an English Moor or figure out where to shoot an English Moor. I don't know why. I just kind of want to do like a history piece on the incarnations of English Moors right now.
There's some great footage in this of just, it's clearly a set, but, it's a huge set, lots of mist and fog and boulders and gravestones and
production value,
all that good stuff that you want from a old B horror movie kind of thing. Which you could probably tell is like, you've got a huge sound stage, and then, you shoot one scene, you move the boulders around, you shoot a different scene. But you still, as long as you've got that fog in there, I will keep watching for days.
Yep. Heavy use of fog machines, which back in the day were pretty toxic, so I almost feel kind of bad for them.
Well, yeah, there were a lot of bad filmmaking practices back in the day.
I mean, they're kind of toxic now, but I mean, it's just unpleasant to breathe nowadays. It won't give you cancer, but back in the day,
at least our modern filmmaking lights won't like literally burn your actor's eyes out.
Right.
But anyway, so speaking of like the family friendly version of this really dark and scary story, there are still elements that they used to keep it in that kind of horror genre. They actually added a seance scene to the movie, which I think you and I both were like, wait a second, did that happen in the book?
Yeah, no, I had to stop and
nope.
look it up. I was like, this doesn't feel... Is this different? Like, yeah.
Yeah. But also they took out some things like, there's a big subplot part of the story where the Hound is like glowing and phosphorescent. And it's probably like a production thing, but they just kind of like skipped over that, which would have been cool to see.
A glowing dog is such a cool visual.
I know. It would have been cool to see, but it would be also very difficult to do in black and white without just either being utterly cheesy or
Or like
probably
literally
not safe
poisoning
for
a
the
dog
dog.
with phosphorus. Yeah, like
Right. But Alex, what did you think about the Hound attack scene, which I think I can say without like giving a lot away. Also, 18th century literature does not does not merit spoilers.
no, right? Like if it's in the public domain, the public domain is the same as the spoiler-free domain. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that hound attack was brutal.
It is. It's kind of a scary scene. Like you can tell they put some effort into that. There must have been some pads, clearly a lot of training, but it is it's pretty vicious, especially for like a 1930s film to get kind of graphic and show that much on screen. Like this is the period where typically if you were going to do that in a mainstream studio Hollywood picture, you would kind of show the dog chasing the person, you would show the person running away, and then you would cut to somewhere else, maybe another person's face watching while you hear the sounds. But you definitely wouldn't see it happen.
Right.
And I do think it is really cool. It's kind of one of the most exciting parts of this movie, and it helps keep it visual, which is pretty key to this being, a movie adaptation. Moving from visuals that are just created in your head through your interpretation of the writing to visuals that are presented as is on screen. So just like you were saying,
there's no getting around that dog was like attacking him. I don't know if they like trained him to play with him in a way that looked like he was attacking him, but that dog was jumping on him and biting at him and all that.
Yeah. And just like you were saying with the disguises being one of the best parts of the visual adaptations, the action scenes being part of the visual adaptations is one of the most exciting parts about these movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
These movies and TVs. These damn kids with their movies and TVs, get off my lawn. I want to listen to my phonograph.
Some people may have an impression of Sherlock Holmes as, he just kind of sits there and he looks through his magnifying glass and he just like spouts out a bunch of facts and observations and stuff. But, Conan Doyle actually put a lot of effort into making these stories really exciting. And if you're following those facts and observations, then he pays it off and gives you a really good conclusion that usually has some element of either just like straight up action excitement or like maybe like international or quote unquote exotic intrigue, because he would often pull elements from different countries, often involving British imperialism, because that's just the time period it was written in. Oftentimes pulling from America, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end of this episode.
Hashtag Mormons.
Hashtag Mormons, hashtag KKK. Like he pulled a lot of American culture into some of these stories.
I wonder if I just offended Mormons by doing that.
By hashtagging them?
Yeah, I don't
know why that would be offensive.
I don't know. I just kind of want to assemble a list. Like I already got the Welsh today.
How many different groups of people can we offend?
Any Welsh Mormons out there must be really pissed.
Well, if we don't do Holmes justice, then we've also got the British on that list.
That's true. And the ghost of Arthur Conan Doyle, who, let me just point out, I find it very funny that Conan Doyle sees Watson as his analog within the Sherlock stories, when Conan Doyle is the one coming up with these complex mysteries and crimes and the crazy ways in which Sherlock solves them. And I know, like the character is based on a real life professor that he had combined with other detectives that he had. But just looking at the scope of the novels and the short stories and all of the crazy ideas that he had to come up with and the solutions that he had to come up with to make these stories work is really impressive. And perhaps one of the reasons that it's such a long lasting character. One, there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of Sherlock material out there. both official and unofficial. And 2, it's all really smart. I've gone through all of the short stories. I've read all the short stories. I've read all the books. And there's definitely some that are better than others, but I don't think there are any that I read and I just go, oh, that was a dumb solution.
Right.
Like they're all incredibly clever and true to the idea that Holmes is a very, very smart person, including the one where Holmes is a retiree and he's old and there's no Watson. I find that one very interesting.
Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned this before, Jonathan, but it's interesting how much Holmes is in this movie, considering that in the book, Holmes really isn't in it for most of it. A lot of it is Watson going in place of Holmes out to the moors to kind of figure out what's going on, and a lot of Watson's adventures. And one of the reasons that sticks with me so clearly is that we had to read this book in school, and it was the first Sherlock story I'd ever read. And I was like, there's no Sherlock in this book. There's just none. Like we started on the chapters with Watson and that's like all we read. But clearly, if you are making a movie that is based on the draw of the character Sherlock,
especially the first one in what may be a series,
maybe
where
a
you're trying to
14 film
establish these
series.
actors and characters,
you have to have Sherlock. And clearly, like it's the original book is a very clever telling. It's not. It probably benefits from the fact that Sherlock isn't in it, and that the chapters with Watson alone are the most interesting chapters for most of the book. But yes,
it kind of when you're reading it, it kind of lets you get all the information through Watson, and you get to start to be Holmes and try and figure it out. But you don't get that same effect in a movie necessarily.
No. Not when everything is presented to you as is on screen. And for that to work, you have to have Sherlock present, which is what they did. And so, you change stuff to make it work depending on the medium. And we've talked about this before with adaptations, and this is a great example. And it kind of carried over and became a thing where, yes, Holmes disappears for part of the telling of the Hound of the Baskervilles, but he typically always comes back for a larger part of the visual adaptation than he is in the original novel.
Again, you got to have him, you've got his vagabond character, so you get to see a little bit of him before he officially comes back. And if you're familiar with the character of Holmes, you're like, that guy seems fishy.
Yeah, I bet if he stood up straight, he would be maybe exactly Holmes's height.
So through those, the amount of time that Holmes is absent from the story, we're following Watson, and Watson gets to sort of be the narrator because he's writing notes back to Holmes in the great old-timey movie way, where he writes like one sentence with words that are huge so that we can be sure to read them.
Yeah, except it's cursive, and I always suck at reading movie cursive.
It's interesting because they're never read aloud, but they basically act as like a narration. Like, today I met so-and-so and they seem suspicious. And we're like, okay, I get it. So Watson actually gets to kind of fulfill the role that he has in the books of being our narrator and our guide through the story.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing when you're taking a film adaptation of Sherlock Holmes is that all the book adaptations are first person from Watson's point of view. So we are stuck knowing what Watson knows and what people tell Watson or what he has learned after the fact. In a film, you're generally in a third-person omniscient point of view where you get to see a lot of things and you cut back and forth between the bad guy and the and Holmes and Watson. And so there are interesting ways that each of these kind of tackle that freedom that the film format gives them when they're covering such a limited perspective in the story.
Yeah, exactly. And in case anybody out there isn't aware, the original stories are pretty much all told, with a few exceptions, from Watson's point of view. So he is very much our lens into that world. So that's an interesting way that it's done in a audiovisual film adaptation version. And one of the things I find interesting, because there's a lot of this information in Sherlock Holmes stories, is how flashbacks are handled and how going back to reveal how a crime was done was handled back in the day with some of the original crime stories that were coming out.
Yeah, these detective stories have like an inherent Rashomon effect. So that the way that you handle that, going back and telling, like just listening to someone tell something that happened before is really interesting, because sometimes those are very long digressions and you have to keep it interesting.
Yeah. And this one, the flashbacks here are very, very golden age Hollywood, let's say. They're very stylized. They're very ornate. There's a lot of production value put into them, as well as the regular Sherlock story. They're very big, and a lot of them have... Was it this one or the Sign of Four that has the overlay on it? Like, it has like a script overlay when they're reading a book.
This one has the overlay. Sign of Four has just really long fades on the creepy guy.
Yeah. And... that flashback idea, going back to how the crime actually happened, or in this case, the original historical crime actually happened, it's just inherent in how these crime stories are told, and it's common even nowadays. I mean, you have a crime procedural like CSI or NCIS or something like that. Like, they go back and tell you how they show you typically how crimes happened to a certain extent, so that you know. In fact, the original Study in Scarlet, the first Sherlock Holmes novel, like the second half of it.
The entire second half.
50% of the book is going back to explain the original crime that kicked off all of these things. And it's important to note with that this is the first Sherlock Holmes story ever. So, Conan Doyle wasn't like, oh, Sherlock's a big star, there's going to be this ravenous fan base. Like, he was just out to tell an interesting story. And that's how he chose to do it. But yes, flashbacks are an inherent part of crime mysteries, because that's the answer to what we're trying to find out.
It's interesting because they use that overlay effect in this film, and I watched a Raymond Massey version. Raymond Massey played Jonathan in Arsenic and Old Lace, for anyone who's been following the podcast since then, and I think we're going to see him next time too. But in this Speckled Band from 1931, so this is even 8 years before this film, and we're talking like, this is probably still like right at the beginning of just sound in film, but they do that overlay effect where the girl who's telling the story is talking about these different characters, and we see their faces kind of like overlay on top of the footage of her talking about it. So it seems to be just like a pretty common thing in the Sherlock universe to do that kind of a thing. But also, I think people at this really early stage of film just really liked to play with effects like that whenever they got a chance.
Yeah. I mean, the story's pretty much set, so all of the fun in doing one of these adaptations is seeing how you can interpret it visually. So
yeah, and
makes
it gives
sense that
it a
there's so
style.
much visual play. Yeah,
which we are still seeing. The style of Sherlock Holmes being tested and pushed, as we will see in our last movie episode thing.
Yeah, and maybe most importantly, finding a way to connect to all of the previous retellings, but also stand out as its own thing. Finding a way to be
because you can't get
different.
away. Like, anyone who's going to do Sherlock Holmes now, whether it's Ian McKellen or Robert Downey Jr. or
Blubberwell Chesterfield.
Thank you. You have a long line of shoes that you're filling, and you've got to do something different, because there is one Sherlock Holmes, but there are so many different facets to her personality that it's so interesting to see which aspects each of these leading men pick to highlight.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of different ways to do it. And it's not like it's going to stop anytime soon. This will be going on forever. Strap in, explore the past Sherlock Holmes, because they're great, and get excited for the future Sherlock Holmes, and enjoy whenever they get around to making another season with But a White Boy Can't Beckon.
All right, Jason, tell us about the next film that we're going to be talking about.
Thanks, Jonathan. Now we're going to be moving on to The Sign of Four from 1987. Mary Morstan approaches Sherlock Holmes to help her investigate the disappearance of her father after she receives a mysterious invitation. Together, they meet a man named Thaddeus Sholto, who tells them that his and Mary's father had acquired a treasure in the past, but Sholto's father had stolen it from the other partners and hidden it away. Sholto's brother Bartholomew has recently found the treasure, and Thaddeus wants to split it with Mary. But when they arrive at the estate, they find that Bartholomew is dead and the treasure had been stolen. Holmes and Watson are now racing the local police force to find the killer and recover the treasure. And now back to you.
Thanks, Jason. So, this film stars Jeremy Brett, and to a lot of people, Jeremy Brett is like the definitive Sherlock Holmes portrayal. In one sense, because he spent and I should say, by the way, that we have seen Jeremy Brett not too long ago on the podcast, as he played Freddie from My Fair Lady. That has a crush on Eliza Doolittle.
Yeah.
So there you go. But for one thing, he spent a lot of time researching the character, and he put a lot of time and talent into making sure that this was a very consistent character to that of the book. And also the fact that they created 7 seasons of this show and covered a whole lot of the actual stories from Arthur Conan Doyle. So if you're looking for a visible representation of the canon of Sherlock Holmes, you're going to end up looking at Jeremy Brett at some point or another, because they just covered so much of it and put a lot of effort into making sure that it was faithful, not taking a lot of liberties, but just putting Sherlock Holmes on the screen. And I think Jeremy Brett does a great job. One of my favorite things about him is he has the thing that Sherlock Holmes does, which is he doesn't care until there's something that he can't figure out, and then he cares a lot about the case. And he will just go after it with all of his might until he solves it, and then he doesn't care about anything again.
Yeah.
But there's so much that you can see about what he's thinking in his facial expressions. Jeremy Brett's facial expressions are wonderful. There's a point where Watson picks up the poisonous dart that killed Bartholomew, and he's just looking at it, examining it. He wants to see how sharp it is, and Holmes is like, "Don't do that. That's poisoned." And when he says the word poison, he smiles. He has this little psychotic smile at the word poison that I thought was just so brilliant, because he's so excited about what's going on and the fact that he doesn't exactly know what happened yet. And I don't know, I just thought it was delightful to watch him go through this film.
Yeah, no, he's a much more complex incarnation of the character than Basil Rathbone's incarnation. And again, this is not knocking Basil Rathbone's incarnation. Those movies were trying to do something very different than this version is. And this version's trying to show a much more serious version of the character, who's much more, and we're kind of getting to this point. We're exploring why he is interested to certain cases, and what about those cases make it interesting to this character who has achieved almost superhero status in popular mythology. So to see a much more intense version of the character is quite a turn, quite unique compared to the Rathbone version, and very interesting. And I might say a little more true to the book than to the books and the short stories than the 1939 version. Which is interesting, and they definitely had a lot of room to explore that and get really good at doing it over the course of 7 seasons of TV. I should also say this one had a huge impact on the baseball mitt Cuggleswart version. When I watched this film, we started off pretty much either right away or the first or second scene is in the Baker Street house. And it looks almost exactly like the Baker Street house in the Sherlock TV show, the modern day one.
The geography is almost identical if some of the details aren't.
The architecture, the layout, the way Sherlock treats Mrs. Hudson, Even like the way the windows are done, it's just a lot brighter. There's a lot more light coming in there.
There's an extra window.
The walls are white. But yeah, and the way Jeremy Brett moves is much closer to the Buttercup Candlestick version. Obviously, timeline-wise, what I'm saying is the modern-day version pulled a lot from this version.
Yeah.
Because this was such a popular modern incarnation. This is probably like the definitive version of Sherlock until modern Sherlock trotted along.
And these are both British productions, so, they're running in this. I wouldn't be surprised if Sherlock pulled, like, actual set pieces and stuff from the Granada television version that Jeremy Brett did.
They're like, oh, hey, do you guys have any of that left in storage? Yeah, let's use that.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
Even down to like the weird experiment on the table. Like I'm sure if I actually sat down and watched the TV show, there would be a weird experiment on the table in each episode. It just so happens that this is only one movie, so there's only time for one experiment. But yeah, very down to that. And the Watson is much, much more complex than the Watson we see in the 1939 version.
And this is a great story to talk about Watson in, because The Sign of Four is a story where he meets and falls in love with Mary Morstan, who is the client when she comes in. So we get to see in this film Watson the romantic. We get to see a more romantic side. And we also get to see him just, using his skills and what he brings to the table in these stories. He examines the body and, says what he died of and what kind of poison it was and all that kind of stuff. And he helps Sherlock Holmes in the chase scene, because we still remember he's a military man. And there is a chase scene. It's awesome. It's a boat chase.
The boat chase is so good.
The boat chase is awesome.
I mean, the boat chase in the novel is one of the highlights of the entire Sherlock Holmes series, and I was so excited to see it in a visual format, and it delivered. It was pretty darn good. Yeah.
Also, the highlight of that book for me is when they find the body of the brother Bartholomew, and that Conan Doyle describes it as taking place at night, and they look through the keyhole and see moonlight streaming in, and this guy's face frozen in this horrific smile. Unfortunately, one of the things we have to consider is that this is a television production, so even though this is a feature-length version, there were I think two of them. They did Sign of Four and Hound of the Baskervilles that got a feature-length adaptation, but they still are working on a TV budget. They don't have a huge budget, and TV did not have the budget that it does today. So they shot it in the daylight, and it's still a very striking and creepy scene. But I feel like this crew had the skill, like they knew what they were doing, because they do like rack focuses and stuff like this that you pointed out in our notes this week kind of translate to a more dramatic effect into Sherlock. But I feel like they had all that. I just don't think they had the budget to do what they probably put all their budget, honestly, into the nighttime boat chase. Which I'm fine with.
Seriously, from a production standpoint, a boat chase is one of the hardest scenes you could possibly shoot. Water,
and
chase,
at night. Everything at night is expensive.
Yeah, no, I mean, imagine trying to light those boats. Man, that was not easy. But they pulled it off. They pulled it off very, very well. It's very worthwhile. Yeah. And you're right. A lot of even down to the cinematography, the rack focuses and stuff gets pulled into the later version of Sherlock. I spent most of my time this week just thinking about how close this and the Bumble Shack CoverGirl version of Sherlock are.
Yeah, but also Watson is more developed, and the relationship between Sherlock and Watson is much more developed. You can see the friendship a lot more. Like, you can see the fact that, as on a human level, they're equal, and even if intellectually they have different things or bring different things to the game. Because one of the things that Watson does, even if he can't make all the connections that Holmes does, but he'll sometimes just say something, some thought that crosses his mind, and then that sparks something in Holmes's mind. He's like, oh, I didn't see it that way before. And that helps him like kickstart one of his deductions. And so we get to see that respect that Holmes has for Watson, that, you know, you don't really get whenever Watson is just kind of like the clown guy following around.
Yeah. There's a reason Sherlock is friends with Watson.
Yeah.
Like, it's very evident why Watson hangs out with Sherlock, and it's the same reason that any of us would want to hang out with Sherlock. But there are very good reasons
Slightly
that Sherlock
less obvious in Sherlock the show.
Right. You know, it's much more evident that he's an asshole in Sherlock, but that's okay, because who doesn't love buffalo carrot stick?
But you can see the warmth in this adaptation. There was some moment where they, I think it was towards the end, and they like discovered something, and they just like had this laugh together, and I thought it was such a nice moment between them. That you don't see a lot in really either. You get some of it in Sherlock, but we'll talk about where the characters are coming from and going to in that show. But the other thing to mention, like, since this is a television show, and I think this is coming out like after the second season or something, so we're well established. You know, we not only don't have to establish Sherlock because we know who Sherlock as a character is, but there's no need for any kind of exposition of this show, the style of this show, the portrayals by these two actors. You know, the show just like starts really quickly into this, and it almost feels abbreviated at the beginning. You know, we're seeing the titles coming on as Mary comes into the apartment, and they just kind of like skip out a lot of little chatty moments that you might get in something that's trying to establish the dynamic between these characters and stuff. So I thought that was interesting that, you know, there's practically no exposition. We're seeing Watson and Holmes, and then we jump into the mystery.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it is nice. And, you know, that's the way it functions in the book, too. Right. Which makes this feel like an even more faithful adaptation, is that, yes, we do get, like, A Study in Scarlet is an origin story, as well as a Mormon story. It introduces us to the characters and explains what's up with them. But every other book, every other short story, it works on the assumption that this is a pre-established duo, this is how it works, and this is how they adventure. And there are one or two stories that have a bit of a hint at a character arc or development, or that, yes, the lives do go on. You know, Sherlock dies, in quotes, and comes back. Yeah. There's a point where,
obviously in this one, after this Watson gets married. Watson gets married and moves out. And then every story after this is about, has to start off with somehow Watson and Holmes hanging out again for some reason. Like, they always have to explain why two grown men might see each other other than, hey, they're friends. And then, of course, later on, there's one or two stories that are very situational, like the ones where Holmes is retired and living by himself on, like, the beach. Which I think is actually the basis for a lot of that drove the story for Mr. Holmes. Yeah, the Ian McKellen version.
Yeah, and of course
came out a couple years ago.
There's a special version that is of dubious canonical timeline validity that came out around the time of the First World War when Watson and Holmes reunite to become super spies. That's kind of an odd one, but it's there.
Was that one of the Rathbone adaptations?
No.
I feel like there was a Rathbone adaptation with Nazis or something.
I think there was, but I don't think it had anything to do with this because, I mean, World War I, there wouldn't have been Nazis. I'll figure out more, and I'll like, I don't know. I'll tweet out the unique ones, the really like oddball Sherlock Holmes stories. But
the point is, you're right. This as a series, and this is why we have two of our quote movies. Why we're breaking our rule this week for mostly trying to only cover movies on this podcast, is that this character is built as an episodic character. You know, that's just where he comes from. He comes from a series of stories in the newspaper that you would read one week after the next, and so it just lends itself to a episodic television in our current media structure, a television portrayal. And so yeah, it makes it feel much more like the book, because you can just kind of throw us into a story and we don't have to have any backstory, because just everyone knows who these people are.
Exactly. Which has led to like their continuing popularity. Like, it's a self-perpetuating fandom machine. Like, the people, and that's kind of a weird, nice connecting thought, isn't it? Like, the crazy Tumblr person who, crazy in a good way, who made the Benedict Cumberbatch, or sorry, I said it correctly. That's weird.
Uh-oh.
Wow, party foul. The wonderfully crazy Tumblr person who made the Benadryl Cutting Snatch name generator has a lot in common with the ravenous fan who protested the killing off of Sherlock Holmes in the 1890s. Like,
yeah,
it's
and I won't even get into
nice
all the Sherlock shipping fans.
No, we don't need to go there.
But I think this is a good time to get into Sherlock. So, Jason, set us up.
Thanks, Jonathan. And our final film, A Study in Pink from 2010. Retired Army doctor John Watson finds an odd new flatmate in one Sherlock Holmes, self-declared consulting detective. As they begin to live together and learn each other's quirks, Watson is caught up in Holmes' latest case, investigating a series of suicides across London, which the London police are unable to account for. And now back to the filmlings.
Thanks, Jason. So in this film, we get to see the beginning of Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman in their relationship as Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. So, like we've been saying, that in a lot of respects, you don't need to establish Sherlock Holmes unless you are going to drastically alter the style and the setting from any other adaptation that has come before, which is what happens here in this one. So there is exposition that is needed. Right. So there's exposition that is needed to an extent. You know, you have to temper the audience's expectations, because there is such a clear-cut image of Sherlock Holmes in so much of the public's mind that doing something like this is a really big risk, and to see what the reaction is. Obviously, the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive.
Wow, nice emphasis on the H there, and overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Thank you. I, after 67 episodes, I thought I should start enunciating a little bit.
Man, I don't think I'm ever going to get there.
So we know who Sherlock Holmes is, but we don't know who Sherlock Holmes is in 21st century London. And so Stephen Moffat and the gang,
Billy Bob Cuckoo Clock,
including Mark Gatiss, who makes an appearance in the show, they have to show us how we can keep the same personality traits and character traits, but also put them in a modern setting.
Yeah, you're right, Jonathan. And I think we should kind of establish this now, because they established this very early in this show. This is a show that is less about the mysteries, although that is very important. It's very much about the relationships in the show, and the central friendship of Watson and Holmes, which has become more of the star of the show than Booty Trap Charmander by himself has. It's kind of about that entire development, and that's been a part of the past incarnations, but in this one that very much is central. Seeing how they become friends, seeing how they stay friends, and seeing how their friendship is affected by these different events, by like the Moriartys thrown in their way, and exploring that, because as we've said before, there's a reason these two hang out together. Like they make each other better people when they're around each other. It just certainly in this version, like, Sherlock is his best version when when Watson is around. Otherwise, he's just like a sociopath. Sorry, highly functioning sociopath. That is a direct quote.
Yeah. But given that as a goal, being the first episode, we have to start them both in really dark places. So we see the most pompous and inconsiderate version of Sherlock Holmes out of these three. Even the pretty faithful Jeremy Brett adaptation has, a lot more warmth and compassion, whereas Benedict Cumberbatch is very cold to other people and not very empathetic towards people. And we start him there so that we can grow him later on throughout the show. And we start Martin Freeman off at a place where he's got this like self-pitying streak going on.
Watson's in a dark spot at the start of this.
I mean, the very first frame of this is war footage or some kind of like mocked up war footage of the Afghan war,
followed
which
by
is
therapy.
Which is a nice nod because Watson in the stories actually did come from an Afghan war, just a different one in a different century.
Was it the Afghan war or was it the Boer War? Oh, now I gotta check.
So Watson starts out in this place where he's been shot. He's got this limp that we come to find out is mostly psychosomatic. So he's really like feeling sorry for himself about being, discharged from the army, because part of his character arc throughout this is realizing that he's not sad because he's been shot and is having to get back into. I thought so. So, I mean, that was a pretty appropriate move for the Sherlock producers. But his journey is having to realize that what he wanted was that excitement, and that that kind of war adrenaline was his drug. So, he kind of becomes a little bit more parallel to Holmes in that regard, because throughout the character of Holmes, you realize that if Holmes is not on a case and not getting that excitement, he reverts to drugs, which I meant to bring up in the last movie because we could actually show some of his drug dependency in the 80s on television. It wasn't very explicit, but it was much more obvious than in our 1939 movie.
And drug use.
And here in A Study in Pink, actually throughout the whole Sherlock show, it gets much more explicit towards the later seasons. But it's kind of hinted at in this movie, and we get the nicotine patches, which is fun. It's like, oh, he always has a pipe, and now he has nicotine patches. There are a lot of really fun things where they take like direct quotes from the stories and twist them into modern adaptations. So, for example, in A Study in Scarlet, Holmes calls his brain a little attic where he stores information, and in the modern version, they call it a hard drive. So
I thought it was like a mind palace.
That's different. That's his memorization technique.
Gotcha. My bad.
So we're establishing all of these little things and little quirks, and the other big factor of this show is that the goal of Sherlock the show is not to be faithful adaptations of specific Conan Doyle stories. So A Study in Pink, the title refers quite blatantly to A Study in Scarlet, which is the first novel by Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes. And the story generally follows the trajectory of the beginning of that book, but then it takes a new turn on the ending in order to set up an arcing narrative with Moriarty and stuff. And then the later episodes will actually not follow a single specific Holmes story, but will mash up a lot of them into one in order to create, again, just to follow this overarching Moriarty narrative. So, that's something that we're not looking for. We're not looking for, when are the Mormons going to show up, like they did in the book. We're like, okay, so how are they going to change this? How are they going to keep this interesting and fresh?
Yeah. It turns out, again, emphasis on inter-character relationships. the relationship between Moriarty and Holmes, which is mostly unexplored in a lot of the original work, a lot of the original novels and short stories. It becomes incredibly important.
Well, yeah, I mean, granted that Moriarty was literally just a cop-out device to get rid of Holmes in the stories, and then after he came back, he was like, oh yeah, I built Moriarty up to be this really important guy, so I guess I should mention him a couple more times.
Yeah. And of course, like, that's kind of the origin story of why Moriarty's a character, but I like that this version takes that opportunity to go back and be like, okay, they are arch nemesis. I genuinely don't know how to say that. Let's explore how they became that. Let's explore this duel between the two, because that'll be interesting. And of course, they do that over the course of multiple seasons.
And they do it really cleverly in this one because, Moriarty is one of those indelible aspects of Sherlock Holmes. You can't have Robin Hood without the Sheriff of Nottingham. You can't have Sherlock Holmes without Moriarty somewhere. And so even though he was kind of this cop-out technique, he has taken on a life of his own and become integral to any adaptation. And here they play the audience on that, because they do this huge setup and reveal for who we think is going to be Moriarty, and it turns out to be Mycroft, Sherlock Holmes' brother, who's an actual character from the books. But they're just so dramatic about it. They like practically kidnap Watson and take him into this creepy parking garage and all of this stuff. But again, we're making exposition here. We are playing on the idea of exposition because we know that this episode is setting up a lot of things that are going to be paid off in the future, and we're being misdirected because of that expectation.
Yeah, and of course, this incarnation of Sherlock Holmes has turned into such a widespread, popular, influential piece of media that it's hard to imagine that this isn't going to have a major effect on future tellings of the story. Because, of course, there will be. It'll just keep going. Right. So whatever the next major...
we won't mention Elementary, but...
No, because no. Stop.
Speaking of Americans ruining things.
Can we cut that out of the podcast? Gee, I hate that show.
Did you actually watch it? I never actually watched any of it.
Yes, I do.
Oh, no.
I did. It's not voluntary. It's just, I don't know. Something about it irks me deeply. And for anyone wondering, it's not Lucy Liu. Lucy Liu's great. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the
whole idea.
The needless Americanization of a story that does not need to be Americanized, which is, part of the history of American media. I mean, even the Basil Rathbone version, which happened in America, was so British. Anyway,
like British had their imperialization, and America has like imperialization of media.
Yeah, no, books about it, man. Go to probably a section in your local library. So yes, of course, we've talked about the relationships. We should talk about style, because this show does not shy away from doing extreme visual stylizations, whether it be almost all of the text and emails being exchanged showing up on screen, typically like anchored to something, to
transitions,
really
just
funky transitions that are like really clever graphical transitions that are kind of out of the ordinary. Well, definitely out of the ordinary, but very clever. And I don't know if they have any effect outside of just setting the tone really well for this snappy, upbeat, stylistic show that's just going to keep moving and keep you guessing. But they're there, and they're a key part of making this incarnation distinct from some of the past ones.
Yeah, because just the look of it is complete. Like you said, like even if some of the geography and some of the set design and stuff is similar, if you turn on a frame of Sherlock, you're not going to confuse it with with any other incarnation of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, right.
You'll be lucky if you get a point where he's wearing a deerstalker.
Which becomes a joke in the show.
Right, exactly. So yeah, like the style almost becomes a character, but it keeps you interested in. And that, like I was saying before, sometimes the driest part is gathering the evidence and finding the next clue and stuff, which is cool if you're into it, but also can just be kind of talky and boring if you're not totally invested. But when you've got speed ramping and you've got overlaid graphics and you've got Benedict Cumberbatch's curly hair going all over the place and he's like jumping up and down and he's so energetic in this adaptation, which is great because the character of Sherlock Holmes is very energetic and athletic, which I think
and hyped up on cocaine. Well,
that too. Not when he's working though. But I think we actually have to give some credit to Robert Downey Jr. and Guy Ritchie for bringing a little bit of energy into the character of Sherlock Holmes, because some of the other adaptations like Basil Rathbone and stuff, they were kind of, not completely static, but they were not quite as active as the actual character of Sherlock Holmes was. He was a boxer. He was a judo master, which is actually part of the explanation given when he comes back after the Reichenbach fall. Guy Ritchie takes that.
He ran a lot in the stories.
Yeah, so Guy Ritchie takes that like to 11 with Robert Downey Jr.'s action hero. And I think Benedict Cumberbatch does a good job of balancing that. And he also does a good job of bringing Jeremy Brett's use of facial expressions and just being able to read his thought process in his face and being able to tell when he's completely disinterested in what you're talking about and when he's like completely in tune with how this is helping the case.
Acting.
It's great. We don't talk about actors enough, so I think this is really good to see three different actors taking on the same character who has a canon that's all the same personality, but they're, like I said, emphasizing different aspects of it.
Yeah, they all do it very well, but just very differently. And of course, the score for this version of Sherlock is brilliant. Like, just again, another stylistic, technical aspect of the show that just pulls together this whole new upbeat tone for Sherlock compared to some of the past incarnations. That makes it very distinct. And it's thematically very popular,
relevant, because you've got that plucky violin, which is what Sherlock Holmes does when he's thinking. One of the things that I thought this week, and if we haven't offended the British Sherlock Holmes fans yet, I will when I say that I was realizing that the violin is basically Sherlock Holmes's fidget spinner.
It kind of is. It kind of is.
He picks it up
something with your hands while you think.
Yeah, he can play it, but he doesn't play it very well when he's
cocaine.
Thinking. Yeah.
What's worse for the soul, Jonathan? Cocaine or fidget spinners?
Ooh. Tune in next time.
Maybe I'll run a poll. We'll see.
So again, and we were talking about the individual characters of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, but we do get to see their relationship here, and it starts off a little rough because, again, we're starting them both in very dark places, but they have that common interest in the need for the hunt and the adrenaline and getting into it and just having that rush. And so they start bonding over that, even though they haven't totally figured each other out yet, if one can ever figure out the character of Sherlock Holmes. But there's also that friendship there. Again, Martin Freeman's John Watson brings a lot to the table. He brings, again, he's athletic as Sherlock Holmes, so they're running through the streets together, which the Watson in Sherlock Holmes' story was fairly athletic as well. And he's got his medical expertise, he's got his war expertise. So, again, we're getting those well-developed characters, that well-developed relationship of someone who brings something to the table, even if, Holmes is going to bring it all the way to the conclusion by the end. But Watson is an integral part of the process. Holmes literally goes back. He leaves to go out on his case, and he literally comes back to get Watson, and that's how they start off on these adventures.
Yeah. It's established that for whatever reason, like, they are important to each other, and then we explore that reason for the rest of the show. Which is interesting. And they've gotten deeper and deeper into that as the show's gone on. Like, by the end of this latest season, like, it's gotten their relationship, their friendship has become very important. Also, before we slip into overall notes, I just wanted to say, Bunsen burner cockatiel. All right, now into overall notes.
All right, so let's just get into it with Alex. Who do you prefer out of the 3 adaptations that we watched today? Which one do you think resonates with you more? We both have a good knowledge of the actual canonical stories and these 3 actors and portrayals. So, what are your impressions?
Yeah, and so this doesn't have anything to do with who I think is the best Holmes, because I think that's kind of an irrelevant question. It's a very baity question. I can see why somebody might be interested in the answer to it, but I think it's kind of irrelevant because, again, these are all actors trying to do different things with the character. And so why Basil Rathbone's fun, Jeremy Brett is intense and interesting, but I think it's got to come back to Brittlestick Cumberbund for me. For no other reason than, like, he is a Sherlock designed for the modern times in which I live. I find that intensely relatable. I like characters with a lot of depth who where that depth is explored in a story. And a lot of the modern Sherlock television show is about exploring that depth in Sherlock and making him more than just like a weird superhuman who solves crimes. So for that reason, Bakery Copper Wire, I think, takes it for me.
Okay. Personally, I'm actually going to go with Jeremy Brett, just because I'm a sucker
I knew you were going to say that.
I'm a sucker for literary accuracy. I think Sherlock the show is much more exciting and more fun to watch. But as far as portrayals of Sherlock Holmes, I'm going to have to go with Jeremy Brett. I just love the way that he's able to take it in its setting and make it so interesting and just bring it to life, basically like right off the page.
That's an intensely satchel answer. And I think we've talked about this deeply over the course of this podcast, but maybe we should bring it back to this. Why is Holmes so popular? Why is he the most portrayed character ever?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just taking it back to Conan Doyle's stories, you would think that as Conan Doyle got tired of writing the stories, that people would get tired of reading them because, at some point, not to say they all have a very interesting aspect to them, but to some extent they become variations on a theme. And yet I think part of it is the point of view. It's being able to tag along with someone who's so good at what they do, and is just so far superior to other people. I think that's also a draw of superhero movies. Like you said, there's almost a superhuman quality of Sherlock Holmes, and it's just it's kind of this fantasy of like, man, these things are so obvious if you're only looking for them, and so it draws us to them because, like, we could do that in our own lives. If the more observant that we are, the closer that we get to Sherlock Holmes. But as Sherlock Holmes says in one of the stories, there are so many obvious things that nobody by any chance ever notices.
Yeah. And of course, the entire setup of the character at a basis is, perfect for interesting. He follows like all of the rules that we've come to learn, know, and rely on to make a character interesting. Make him extraordinary but relatable. Give him a foil that is our entry point to viewing a character that makes him reachable as an audience. And then, of course, a key to popularity is repeatability and being able to, have this story and have different incarnations of the story over and over and over and over and over and not get tired of it. leads to, that's when you know you've got something. And clearly there is something special about Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. And you're right that, again, like we've been talking about, that inherent repeatability. Like, if you can get a Sherlock Holmes portrayal, an actor who can play Sherlock Holmes in a way that people like, then, you're just sitting on a jackpot of content that you will not run out of for a very long time, even if you only stick to the true canon. And then if you're going off script like Sherlock, who knows? You could go forever, really, with it.
Yeah. They just don't make seasons very often.
Right. And I think they're not totally planning on making another one right now, which is sad.
Who knows? Please make another one, Beelzebub cottage cheese.
Yeah, I think everyone that's involved in the show said that they would love to keep doing it, but they're just all so busy right now. So maybe in like 30 years, they will all get back together for a reunion tour, and we'll get to see Benedict Cumberbatch as a beekeeper.
Do like a really old one.
That would be great. But yeah, and we can't forget about Watson. I think Watson, we've been talking about him a lot, but he's an integral character. He's really important to Sherlock Holmes as he is, and we've seen different versions. We've seen Watson the Bumbler, who just kind of like goes around and doesn't really notice anything and is just astonished at everything. And we've seen the romantic who has input into the case with Holmes, and he has a little bit more of a human side than Holmes because he falls in love with a woman and starts to have that family life. And we've seen Watson the soldier in Sherlock, who is a little more hardened and has to break out of his shell a little bit. And so no matter how he's portrayed, he has a real bearing on Sherlock Holmes and how approachable the Sherlock Holmes portrayal is to us. Because again, Watson is inherently our access to Sherlock Holmes. So I think that that's really interesting, having a character that, for lack of a better word, the secondary character is almost just as integral as the main character to be just as interesting.
Yes. All right. Any last thoughts, man?
I don't think so. I think we've about covered it. I'm glad we got to do this because this is, I know we both have a real love for Sherlock Holmes, and it's really interesting to see how he keeps coming up in different and interesting ways.
Yeah. It's not like he's going away. We're going to be stuck with him forever in a good way, hopefully. So future content makers, do well with Holmes because we like our Holmes content good, and we want to keep it good moving forward, please.
Elementary.
Yes, that was an awkward plea. Also, real quick, I don't know if we squeaked in this fun fact, although I did tweet it out, but elementary, my dear Watson, never said in the books. Said in a movie.
Interesting.
And then it was repeated a couple times in different movies, and then it started to become really popular when some of the big incarnations like Basil Rathbone picked it up, and it just ran with it. He only said like elementary. That was it in like one time in the entirety of the books and short stories.
Now I know.
Yeah, now you know. I feel like that gets said a lot when somebody listens to our podcast. Like, now I know.
That's the goal of the podcast, so I'm glad.
That's our that should be like our subtitle. The Filmlings. Now you know.
All right, well, what are we going to know about next time?
Well, next time we're going to talk about the productions of The Archers, which is a production direction duo, a team consisting of Powell and Pressburger.
We're breaking new ground on that too. We haven't done a directorial team before.
Yeah, we've done the Coen brothers.
Oh, I take it back.
Yeah, this is the first unrelated team.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But
so we're breaking old ground.
We are going to use these guys. We're going to explore their incredibly stylistic fantasies and their heavy saturated use of early Technicolor, which can be intense but can also be beautiful. And we're going to look at some of the films from their hot streak that occurred in the 40s, starting off with The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp from 1943, A Matter of Life and Death from 1946, and Black Narcissus from 1947, all of which should be available on Filmstruck or at your local Criterion Channel Depot, which isn't a thing, but should be. But yeah, it's kind of more art housey movies nowadays. They were pretty popular in Britain at the time that they came out, but we're kind of skewing a little bit away from pop movies, which we've been doing for the past 2 episodes, kind of more towards artsy movies. That being said, if you enjoy pop movies, I think you'll enjoy these movies. For instance,
they're
these
very
guys
approachable. They're not
yeah, they're not like super duper weird. Well, okay, no, I take that back. Some of them, parts of it get weird, but in a way that is accessible. And they do have a large influence on a lot of modern day filmmakers, including Martin Scorsese, who we just talked about last time.
Yep, bringing it all together.
My Powell is actually one of Scorsese's mentors. We talked about that during the episode. Yeah,
in the episode.
Yeah. So join us next week to talk about that. If you like our content, please make sure to follow us on Twitter and or Facebook for more interesting factoids, updates on our schedule and topics that we'll be talking about. And if you have any questions, talk to us. We're available on Twitter. We like to talk about movies. You've got something interesting you want to point out, you got a suggestion, let us know. We're always, almost always available. Jonathan works days, I work nights. It's not like we work at the same place.
So you're going to hit one of us at some point.
Yeah, one of us is always up. So, yeah.
And if you have friends that like movies, use that share button. It's there for a reason.
Yeah. So we like all sorts of film nerds, diehard film nerds, light film nerds, pop film nerds, artsy film nerds, Bollywood film nerds. We know there's a lot of you. We see the stats. But yeah, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And you can also find me, the narrator, Jason, at the Blue Jay 1994, also on Twitter.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
And if you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review or rating on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
Budapest Crumplehorn.
Is there an algorithm that's just combining letters or is searching a online dictionary for words that start with certain letters? Or did someone type all of these up into a random generator?
So I think they've compiled a database of segments of words that would work in different parts of Benedict Cumberbatch's name, like different syllables, and then they just kind of smush them together. And then each time you hit the button, it combines them together randomly. And I'm not reading every one because some of them that come up are just not good. But some of them are. So those are the ones I read, like Bodybuild Custard Bath.